can I ask you just a brief question about modern theological approaches and sort of intra-Jewish relations for a second? So I know that you're involved. The rabbinic tradition plays a big role in your
Yes.
life. You're involved with traditional Jewish communities, and so am I. And I just think if I were to propose this to some of my Orthodox, even conservative friends, that actually it's Jesus who's invisibly working right behind the scenes with you, they would probably say, you can think that, but I don't want it, right?
Of course. Of course.
So do you ever run into pushback? I mean, I don't know. It just seems like, do you ever get accused of Yeshuaifying modern traditional Judaism in this kind of system that you have?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, obviously, Jews who don't believe in Jesus, this is not how they are going to be conceiving of their life, but I've rarely found like a great hostility about it. It's towards me. It's like
right.
Basically every Jew has their own vision of what spiritually is really going on in the midst of the life of the Jewish people. So there are Jewish atheists, and their view, of course, is, well, nothing's happening in terms of a divine reality when Israel, when Jews are worshiping in synagogue, but there's something that's fundamentally just a human expression of something, and perhaps God then is a symbol of something else. For very traditional Hasidic Jews who have a Kabbalistic understanding, they understand this dynamic reality of the Sefirot and all of these amazing things that are happening in the midst of Jewish worship, and that approach would be rather bizarre to a conservative Jew.
Indeed.
For a conservative Jew, it's even the notion of angels are a little strange for most modern Jews. Again, a traditional Jewish person who's not necessarily a Kabbalistic in their orientation still would have this biblical sense of that in the midst of Israel's worship there's a heavenly dimension, and there are angelic forces and a heavenly courts and all of these realities. Whereas most modern Jews, even those who believe in the reality of God, often their approach is much more deistic, and it's us human beings expressing our worship of a God who's far off. These days, you'll find other Jews who are almost more pantheistic in their. The point I'm just making here is that the way different Jews envision what spiritually is really going on when Jews worship is really quite different. And so within that context, the fact that I understand that Jesus is in the midst of the Jewish people, in the midst of a synagogue context, and in some sense mediating the worship of the synagogue in relationship to God is not really that much stranger than that there are angels who are mediating the worship of Israel to God for many Jews. And so my experience is that most Jews don't focus so much on, or they're not so concerned about what everybody's kind of subjective understanding is of what's happening. The focus is on actually just entering into the worship and doing and actually doing it, physically and as a people, and offering ourselves, and then again, I don't think that my perspective is something that other traditional Jews are going to be real fond of. But again, I don't think they're going to be most fond of what the other Jews think that are from other strains of Judaism either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you were saying that, I actually was thinking, as you were giving that wonderful answer, by the way, that was just great, and I'm totally on board. I was thinking maybe when I asked you that question, I wasn't concerned with what other Jews think about your position. I was actually concerned if I, who share your position, right, theologically, would be allowed to say something similar, okay, right? Because just, so I went to school for 7 years with A.J. Levine, who would, what I'm going to say before I say it here. She would say, modern Judaism and modern Christianity should breathe together. Don't impose your theological, constraints upon either one, right? So that's all going through my head as I'm reading your book. But your answer was fabulous. I feel very comfortable with that answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in some ways, I just don't see how Christians can. I don't see another way for Christians to approach such things if they have an understanding, if they have a high Christology, if they have an understanding of Jesus as the eternal Son of God, through whom the world was made, apart from whom there is no relationship with God, then how is it possible to have some view of Jews somehow kind of independently getting to God? So that if a Christian who has that kind of a Christology and understanding, or a Trinitarian understanding, if you are going to say, I believe the Jewish people not only are still beloved by God, but are still in this intimate relationship with God, then the only way you can say that is by saying that Jesus is in union, that they are in union in some ways with the Son of God still, in a way that they can't comprehend. And whether Jews like that or not, what you're actually doing is if you don't hold that, you're distancing themselves, from God, distancing them from God.
That's right.
So I think for other Jewish people, if they're going to be able to, if they want you to actually be true to your own faith, but they also want you to respect who they are, I don't see another way of being able to approach the issue.
Yep. That's really strong. I'm definitely with you. Yeah, very good. Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so I don't want to push you too far. There's one last chapter in your book.
One more, Let's just have one more, and then we'll.
Okay, all right. So you talk about God's divine plan, right, for both the ecclesia and the Jewish people in light of modern Jewish history, and you spend most of the chapter on Zionism. So it's a complex chapter, but it's also really well stated. As I said, I just nodded along the whole time. Can you just give us a brief insight for our viewers into what your thesis of that chapter is?
Yes. Well, what one point that I'm trying to make is that the fundamental reality of that I see, the fundamental spiritual reality of significance in the 20th century establishment of the state of Israel, is not so much this political reality of a new commonwealth being established. It is the reality of large numbers of Jews returning to the land promised to their ancestors, and reestablishing a corporate Jewish life in that place. And so what I'm trying to do then is say that the state of Israel is significant in a kind of instrumental sense, in that this corporate life of the people, in order to exist, needs some kind of to take some sort of political form. But my concern is that sometimes the political reality of the state gets elevated to a theological status that I don't think is appropriate or necessary. So what I'm trying to argue about that theologically, the return of Jewish people to the land in large numbers and the reestablishment of a corporate Jewish life in the land is of tremendous theological significance, and that Christians need to really to deal with that theologically in a way that that many haven't.
Absolutely.
And I'm trying to formulate it in a way that does not make that equivalent to what's often known as Christian Zionism.
Of course, good.
Again, the focus is often placed on the political reality of the state. A second point that I'm trying to make, I would say that's significant, is that that in some ways what is happening in the return of Jewish people to the land, while it can be understood again itself as a prolepsis or an anticipation of an eschatological or messianic fulfillment, it is not yet that reality,
right?
And that there is a kind of necessary gap that has to be preserved between that eschatological fulfillment and the reality in this world. And what that from my perspective, what honoring that gap entails is not. It has certain kinds of political implications. The political implications that I'm seeing is that one should not hold on theological grounds that it is essential for the Jewish people to hold on to every square inch of land, have sovereignty over every square inch of land, and in that area promised to the ancestors of the Jewish people and the Jewish people as a whole. That full possession is this part of this eschatological inheritance. But that because there is this gap between this world and the world to come, that we can't just be approaching it as though the same reality holds now and the same responsibilities hold now. And so what I'm trying to do is leave room for political, prudential decisions to be made on the ground by the parties that be, and for concerns of for various kinds of ethical concerns and concerns that have to do with more issues of justice to enter into play in the resolution of various disputes. And I'm trying to bring that together with this very full-bodied recognition of the significance of the land, its connection to the Jewish people, and this prophetic sense of the significance of the return, of the restoration of a Jewish commonwealth or a national presence in the land. So this is a difficult thing to hold together, but that's what I'm going to do.
Sure, no, that's great. Just to summarize for 20 seconds, what I took away from your chapter is that God's eschatological promise is a kingdom, right? A basileia, right? It's a kingdom that's coming, but it's not a medina, it's not a state, it's not a Knesset, right? It's not a governmental parliament. These things, to go back to some of your earlier terminology, are relatively unstable, right?
Yes, that's right.
What's stable is the coming kingdom, but in the meantime, pieces can get moved, and we can have critique of certain governmental policies. We can, take certain sides in questions of justice and ethics without being unfaithful to the promise of the land of Israel to the Jewish people, or somehow, being unfaithful to the God of Israel, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful. For our viewers, there's so many wonderful things in that particular chapter, usage of the prophets, vis-a-vis the Deuteronomistic history and how that all works in a modern theological sense. It's all beautiful stuff, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. So again, I commend this book to all of you. Dr. Kinzer, this has been an absolute pleasure for me. I'm really glad to have, just gotten to see you again after a couple of years. I'm really interested in what you continue to do. I'm very much interested in the Society for, Post-Supersessionist Theology, and we can talk offline more about that. But anyway, again, just a huge pleasure, great book, and I really commend you on the work that you've done.
Thank you so much. It's been great being with you, Nate.